Hello, I know this is late, but I finally got 3 looks done with the retro palette, and I have some opinions. So, first things first, the majority of the mattes in this palette are cream to powder, so if you already know you don't like cream to powder, you're gonna definitely want to skip on this one because most of the shades in this palette are cream to powder. I have limited experience with her cream to powder formula, and I personally do find I have some significant issues making it work. Now, I do believe this to be a user skill issue because I have seen many other people with far more experience in makeup than me produce beautiful looks without any of the issues that you will see me have in this video. So it's just something that I, will practice and hopefully I'll get better at, and I'll definitely want to keep researching how other people use these shades. But you can see particularly in the outer corner of the eye I'm working on right now, there's some patchiness. It could also be like a primer issue, just a brush issue. There's all sorts of things that can factor in, but basically, I find her cream to powder formula to be high maintenance, and compared to her standard creamy matte formula, which is a powder, that is like no effort, like 10-15 seconds and suddenly I'm done. As you will see in one of the second or third look in this video, you'll see it's just like the easiest thing in the world for me to work with. So personally, I would rather see more creamy mattes from Natasha Denona than cream to powder, because her creamy matte formula at this point just feels unbreakable. Like, it is just so good. Whereas the cream to powder, it's finicky for me, and I feel like if you don't have much experience with eyeshadow, or if you consider yourself to be a very average eyeshadow user, you might also find these same problems. So I feel like that makes her palettes a little bit inaccessible. Now, I do understand the biggest pro for cream to powder is that you can have these dark shades that have no fallout, but on the flip side, I personally can find it very difficult to build it up to what it looks like in pan. So you can see these shades are very dark in pan, but on my eyes, it doesn't look that dark. The second thing about this palette that I would like for you guys to know if you are interested in purchasing this is that a lot of the shimmers in this palette I would consider to be super satin. I wouldn't even consider it a shimmer. I'm not sure what she's labeled it at on the palette. I'm not sure off the top of my head, so I'm not accusing her of misleading anyone. I'm just saying that a lot of these shades, such as what I put on my aegyo area in this look, are very satin. Now, they can be very beautiful, and I do still like them, particularly this shade I used for my aegyo. It's so soft and subtle that it can define my aegyo without looking like I stuck white, which, if you've watched K-pop from like the early 2000s, you know what that's all about. So yeah, I think this palette is fine, but I think it's going to be for certain people, and other people are going to find it to be absolutely not something they enjoy. It's going to be a waste of money, so just make sure you think about those things. The biggest thing that I liked about this palette is that, and this is Kinky Sweat basically was the person who convinced me to buy it, was Kinky Sweat kind of was like, this reminds me of like Japanese alternative fashion. And I was like, you're right, it totally gives me like Menhera, Yami Kawaii kind of looks. It could definitely be used to make those kinds of almost sickly border, like kind of a hybrid of like goth and cute kind of makeup looks, and so that's why ultimately I got it. So you can see my blush placement for a lot of these looks. I'm kind of mimicking the blush under the eye look. But yeah, I think this palette is gonna be right up some people's alleys, and for other people, you're gonna want to stay as far away from it as possible. But you can see here, I believe this is a creamy matte shade, and it just is so much easier for me to use. I think my eyeshadow primer, I used a really tacky one this time, so the eyeshadow primer probably isn't the most appropriate for this, but I just found this shade to be so much easier to use. It just blended itself. I didn't feel like I really had to build it up hardly at all. Like 2-3 layers, I was done. It looks so nice. Now, this is one of those kinds of weird satins I'm talking about. I thought I could put it on to add some brightness and dimension to the inner corner of my eyelid, but you can see here, it's definitely not matte. But you definitely couldn't call it a shimmer either. It's very satin. And then this shade I'm using here, it looked a lot shinier in the pan than it does on my eyelids. You can see, again, there's just a very minimal amount of shimmer to it. So that's why I ended up going in with one of the actual metallics in this palette, and of course it looks very beautiful. But yeah, it's just, things to keep in mind. There's a time and a place for satins. And if you go into a store and swatch it, you'll see for yourself. So it's not like it's not like Natasha's misleading us or anything. There's nothing shady going on here. It's just a matter of something that I'd like for you guys to know. So yeah, that's kind of my general thoughts on this palette. Personally, just for the color story, just for those pinks being like the perfect pinks for like a Lolita fashion makeup look, I'm gonna be holding on to this. And yeah, Kinky Sweat, you totally just like did this. This is your fault. But yeah, and you know, some of the shimmers in this palette, like the middle one, really are honestly very beautiful. That middle shade, that middle shimmer in this palette almost has a holographic feel to it, which makes me just want to go buy Glam Shop singles, which I'm probably going to go do soon. But yeah, still a solid palette. I mean, I love the looks that I created. You can see that they look really beautiful. I don't really get the retro feel, but I grew up under a rock, so I don't really know anything about retro culture, but I can see how the colors, they definitely feel kind of vintagey to me. Now this shade here, which I believe is called Andy, this is a creamy matte, but it kind of has, again, it kind of feels a little bit satiny. It definitely feels more matte than satin, but it's not totally matte in my experience. I actually thought this shade went on really well with a finger. Like you can see I just finger painted it onto my eyelid and it looked great. And now I'm going to be using this cream to powder formula, and I'm having issues. Like I'm just having issues. And again, I want to reiterate, I'm 90% sure this is a user problem because, you know, from more experienced makeup users, this is getting really good reviews, and Temptalia also really liked it, so I just really need to get better, do my research, try and look up more methods and mimic what other people are doing to work with these shades. But that just kind of makes me want to continue to remind anybody watching this video to think about your skill level and think about how much more you're willing to do to make these shades work for you. And if that's just not something you're interested in, then you're probably going to want to pass on this palette. And that's why I personally would rather see more creamy mattes from her, because her formula for creamy mattes is just so rock solid. I don't see why she couldn't just use that forever. I remember the dark blue and the gold palette that is a cream to powder. It was one of her first cream to powders, and I found that honestly to be really mediocre, and people are saying it's greatly improved since then, and Retro is an example of that, but I personally don't see it, just because I can't make them work. So again, this shade here is another example of a shade that I thought was more metallic than it actually is. You can see it like barely shows up as metallic on my eyelid. It's definitely not matte, but it's definitely not metallic-y. Like I was expecting it to be a lot shinier than it actually turned out. Not to say it's not pretty, but definitely some inaccurate expectations on my part. Now this shade here is much punchier, much prettier, definitely a real metallic we've got going on here. So very beautiful, love this shade. It's silvery, but it's not true silver, which I think makes it a very nuanced and sophisticated shade. So I really enjoyed using that. But yeah, I just overall, this wasn't quite what I expected, but I still enjoyed working with it, you know? Oh, and then I just wanted to highlight my brow bone really quick with one of the lighter bony colored shades in this palette, so yeah, there's that. But yeah, that finishes up these 3 looks. I hope you guys found this to be helpful. If anyone was considering buying it, definitely make sure you think carefully about the formulas. But otherwise, if you are good with that, you would definitely enjoy this. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys in the next video, hopefully very soon. And yeah, that's it.